Okay, welcome back to part 2 of our compositing and animating dragon tutorial. Last tutorial we looked at actually animating our dragon, so we've got this little animation going on. Now in this tutorial we're actually going to look at texturing, lighting and compositing this. So I'm going to start off by, in the hierarchy, disabling our skeleton, because that's just going to get in the way. Otherwise it'll just get in the way, we won't be able to see anything, and considering we've done all our animation, we're pretty good on that front. I'm going to go into the Materials tab, and you've noticed that if you've opened up this model with the Textures folder, it's already pre-textured, this model, which is really good. I mean, textures are really complex to do, but there's one thing I'm going to change, is I'm going to go into each texture and make it affect the rendered normal of the object, just so we can get a good specular highlight onto that. So I'm just going to go into each texture and add that on. Some of them, is that the one I just did? Some of them look like they've already got it activated. Yes, some of them already have the normal activated. Just make sure they've all got it, and then you'll get a nice glisten on the scales of the dragon as we go. Okay, next thing we need to do is actually add a camera. So I'm going to go add camera, and it doesn't matter where it is at the moment, we're just going to position it. I want it to be about here to start off with when our dragon's asleep. So I'm just going to position my actual camera where it is, and then I'm just going to go Control-Alt-0, and that positions the camera where my view is. Insert a keyframe. As the dragon wakes up, I want it to move forward, so I'm just going to go GZZ, and that moves it forward. Just move it off to the side slightly. Insert another keyframe, and when it's actually shooting fire, I want it to be side on, because I'm thinking about the stock footage I've got of some fire to use is from the side, so it's just easier if I move it from to the side now. And then I'll move it back when the fire is going, so it sort of gets an impression of the heat, and then just leave it there for the end of the animation. So that's my camera done, and the next thing we need to do is actually have a setting for our dragon. So I'm going to start by creating a plane for it to stand on, and the plane is fire in the sky, so let's just go into a orthographic view, put it on the floor and scale that up some. Maybe not that big, and we don't want the plane to have a grey texture, so we'll add a material, call it floor, and I'm going to give this a texture, call this bricks, and this is a texture I have used in a lot of tutorials recently, but it's a good texture, so I'm just going to go into my blend files, textures folder, and the actual texture I'm going to use is this bricks old mix size. Open it up. Like with the other textures, I'm going to go into the influence and set it to render than normal. So I'm just going to hit F12, and we get nothing. And you know why? It's because we have no lights in our scene. So I'm going to start by adding a point light. I'm just going to position it above the dragon and slightly to the right. I'm going to go for a traditional 3-point lighting setup. If you don't know what that is a key light which adds shadows, a fill light and a backlight. I'm going to position the backlight slightly lower. There we go, and I'm going to set the backlight to be about 0.5 and the fill light to be about 0.5. And let's see how this looks. So let's just do a quick render, and you can really see when you render this out, the specularity highlights on the skin really makes the dragon look scaly and like a proper beast. Now this is probably going to slow down a bit because of the screen recording software, but we'll let that go. Okay, so not bad for a first render, but there's a few things we need to change. First of all, we need some walls in the background to add contrast, and also the lighting is a bit dim and not quite the way I want it. So I'm going to start off by adding a back wall. Something like that. Literally going to be exactly the same. This is the easy part of the tutorial. let's just do one over here to be safe. And let's just do another render. Now this is going to be slowed down by the screen capture software, so you're going to have to wait for it to come through, but you see just adding that wall really adds the contrast between the dragon and its surroundings. And what I might do later is move that wall further back, so when we get into compositing we can really make a big difference with that. Okay, so this is our current render. Now there's a few things we need to add. First of all, we need to add a light for the fire we're going to add later. We need to move around a few objects and change the shadow properties, because at the moment the shadow is really quite dim. So we need to change a few things like that. So let's just check we have ray shadow enabled on our lights. It's important. So I'm just going to set ray shadow onto our key light. And I'm also going to add another light. I'm going to go Shift D. This light is going to be a sort of orangey red colour. Kind of like that. I'm going to set it to energy to 5 because this is going to be our fire. There we go. I'm going to position this. I'm going to go to where the fire shoots out. Go into my camera view because that's probably going to be the best view for this. Make sure it's set up correctly in the right place. Okay, insert a keyframe. Just make sure it lines up with the mouth all the way. And just switch off ray shadow for this. And also when I get to that keyframe, I'm going to insert a keyframe for the energy of the light, just so it isn't switched on the whole time. And just when the dragon begins to shoot, I'm going to set the energy to 0, insert another keyframe, and when it's done shooting fire, which is around there actually, I'm going to set the energy back to 0, just so the light switches on then switches off. So if we go to about here, when the dragon's midway shooting flame, we should have a big orangey light. And it's okay, but I'm going to twiddle with that colour a bit because it's a bit too red at the moment. I'm going to switch off specularity and make it a bit more orange yellow, and you can fiddle with this colour all day or all night if you want to. Not quite hot enough, I don't think. Say, this is up to you, however you like your light to be. Just going to get mine to something acceptable. And that's kind of alright for our purposes. We just want to get some light on those walls. I'm actually going to set the energy up a bit, I think. At these keyframes, I'm going to set the energy to 8. Just going to go right click, replace keyframe. And I think I added a keyframe in the middle, which I don't want, so I'm going to delete that. So let's just see how that looks, and hopefully that should be it. Yes, that's much better. That's what I'm going for, just get some lighting on the face of the dragon and the surroundings of the dragon. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with that as a render. I'm going to move on to the compositing inside of Blender. So the easiest way to get into compositing is you need to wait for a render to complete so we can work from it, and then we need to go to Control and the left arrow, and then we're suddenly in the compositing mode. And compositing is based on nodes, and if we want Blender to realise we're compositing, we just need to make sure under our render settings we have compositing ticked under post-processing. So let's just wait for this to finish rendering. I think it pretty much has. Yes, I think that's finished rendering, and we need to start compositing. So I'm going to add a render layers input, and I'm going to add an output of a composite. And I'm just going to link these through. So now our image goes straight from the render into the composite. We're finished. No. So we need to change this a bit. First of all, I want to blur out some of the background. So I'm going to add a defocus node. Now this is going to take a little while to render, and that's kind of the nature of the beast. It's quite a complex node, but it does quite a lot for us. So I'm going to plug the image into the image, and the Z value, the depth value, which you can see by just ticking this box, into the depth. And I'm going to plug that image into the composite node, and we'll see what that looks like. And hooray, it looks rubbish. I'm going to switch on the backdrop and just make sure we have a viewer, and make sure backdrop down here is selected, and I can plug that in. Then when it composites, we should have the image in our background. There we go. So it looks pretty rubbish, and that's because we've got preview switched on. If I switch off preview and it recomposites, you'll see we get a much smoother blur, but it's still far too blurry for what we want. So what I'm going to do is, once this is composited and we see the effect of it, we can then go into the Z scale and change it to something more appropriate, like 0.3. I'm just going to cancel the composite so it re-updates. Maybe 0.2 to start with. And the more you've got Z scale, the longer this is going to take to do, to render. So it's kind of a balance. Okay, sorry guys, my blender glitched out there. I've switched to a different frame in the animation to work on, and you can see that that Z size is way too small. So I'm going to up this. I mean, at the beginning of the animation, I'd like it to be so the dragon is literally completely out of focus. So we've got all the blurry objects around it, and it's only when we get closer we can actually see what the dragon actually looks like. So you can see that's really added some more. I'm just going to set it to maps 0.8 for this, and we can add some colour correction, and I'm going to add some mist in just a minute. Just going to wait for that to composite. Okay. So the next thing we need to do is add some mist. So I'm just going to collapse down my defocus node and move on to the next part, which is the mist. So I'm going to add a vector map value node. I'm going to take another instance of the Z and put it in. I'm going to set the offset to about -5, and then I'm going to add a color mix. And what this is going to do is I'm going to plug the value of the map value into the factor, the image of the render layers into image, and take that into the viewer so we can see what that looks like. And the mix node will just take that, and based on the value of the Z, it will change the amount of mist or whiteness in the scene. I'm going to unplug the defocus for now, because that's going to take a very long time to render. And you can see that's a ridiculous amount of mist. So we need to turn the size down to 0.003, usually is quite good. I'm actually going to set that to 0.002. 2, not 2.3. There we go. And I'm going to set the colour to a sort of dark green, sort of a dungeony colour. There we go. And you can change the offset, which is basically when the mist starts. And if you can see, if I change that value to there, the mist starts far earlier, and as I move it back, I mean, -5 works quite well for this scene. And next thing we need to do is plug that into the main composite. So we need to go Shift A and another color mix node. And this time we don't want anything in the factor. All we want is the defocus and the mix in the same node. Put that to the composite and the viewer. And this is going to take a while because of the defocus. But after that we should have a good idea of where we're going. Okay, so that's where we are at the moment. The next thing I want to do is add some color correction to this image. So I'm just going to go Shift A, add color, RGB curves. Put that in between this and the composite and the viewer, just so I can see what I'm doing. There we go, and plug the image into the image slot. And you can actually do this RGB inside the UV image editor. If I hit the N key, you can see you've got the curves, and you can play around with your curves and see what difference they make. And I can just hit this X button to cancel that. And in this scene, I'm just going to add a bit of contrast. Take out a lot of the red values. Pump up the green values, because we want this to be like sort of in a dungeon sort of effect. So let's just wait for that to composite. And as you can see, I've far overdone it. So I'm just going to take the green value and the red value back to something slightly more reasonable. Turn the contrast down slightly, and that's about where I want this to be actually. So I'm going to render this out, and how you do that is I'm going to go into the output settings, select an output folder. So I'm just going to create a new directory called Dragon Output, and I'm going to make sure we are on PNG. Going to do RGBA, although that should make very little difference in this case. Make sure we are under our dimensions, we are set to 100%, 24 frames per second. Our animation matches up to what we have. Going to save it and then click the animation button, and I'll get back to you once this is finished rendering. Okay, welcome to the second part in our compositing. We're actually going to be doing this inside of After Effects. Though I'm sure there's a way you could do this inside of Blender. I just haven't worked it out yet. Probably do that with the image editor, the non-linear editor in Blender, and just use an alpha mask. But I like the way the After Effects interface works, and I've got some footage that works with After Effects, so I'm going to start off by opening up a render. This isn't the render we did, unfortunately, because I've already got a render that I've used from the previous time I did this, and I'm going to open it up as a sequence, hit enter, rename it Dragon, and drag that into a new composition. So you can see how our dragons come out in the end. We've got the nice mist defocus, the way the dragon gets up, and then when we get to the fire, we've got this nice little burning fire. There we go. So what we're really going to concentrate on is the fire section. And I'm actually going to use Action Essentials 2 from Video Copilot, but again, Detonation Films has some great stock footage. But I'm just going to open up a fire, just because I own the collection, it seems silly not to actually use it. Okay, so the fire I'm actually going to use is fire at cam 003. And the reason I'm going to use this is because about halfway through we have a big burst of fire. I'll just solo this quickly. About halfway through the clip we have a big burst of fire which we can use to be our dragon's fire breathing. We just find it, there we go, that's the big burst of fire we want. You see how it starts off by coming towards the camera, but we actually want this little section here which starts there. So I'm just going to go Alt begin bracket, switch off the solo key, and go to where he starts breathing fire, about here, and start that off. Position this in the right place, scale it up, again just keep rotating it, and I just want to create a mask around the bottom of this, so as it continues we don't see that harsh line on the bottom. So I'm just going to create a quick mask and going to go F and feather it about 5 pixels, or maybe 15 pixels. Let's see how that is. Yeah, pretty happy with that. I mean, because this is video, you don't need to worry too much, because each frame, you're not going to see each frame as that quickly. I'm just going to set a position keyframe so I can then move the position over as the camera zooms out. I'm also going to set a scale keyframe, so again as the camera zooms out I can scale it slightly to match, and when we get to here we just want it to disappear. And then we need to work out how to intro this in and out. And to do this, I'm just going to go Effect, Color Correction, Curves, and I'm going to set a keyframe a few seconds in. And before I'm going to switch to the alpha channel and crush that down. You can see the effect that has. It kind of fades in a better way. And when we get to here, I'm going to set another keyframe. Go U to reveal my keyframes, and here, this is again, I'm just going to crush it. And just make sure I've got position keyframe at the end, just to make it seem a bit more realistic. I'm just going to add another opacity keyframe. I'm going to hit T for opacity and switch that down to 0. Now these intros, it doesn't matter if they're perfect, but just get them as good as you can. And there's a big problem we've got, which is right at the end here, it stops. We haven't got enough footage, and I'm just going to edit my mask so we can see right up to the end. It just kind of stops there. And there's one last thing I want to add, which is the add blend mode. And that would just make sure that the fire sort of blends in. And we can do a bit of color correction, some actual color correction to make sure it matches. Again, this is something you can spend as long or as short on as you want. Unusually for fire, I'm going to bring out a lot of the reds and boosts a lot of the greens, just so it matches the sort of lighting we've created in Blender. So I'm pretty happy with that. And the final thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a new solid. I'm going to call this Displace. I'm going to go Control Shift C. Call Displace Comp 1. Happy with that. And I'm just going to go into the Displace. I'm going to go Control Shift Y. Change the solid settings. I want this to be exactly 50% grey, which is somewhere over here. If I just set the hue to 0 and the brightness to 50, that'll give us 50% grey. And I'm going to add a new solid, which is going to be completely white. And on this I'm going to add an elliptical mask, and I'm just going to make sure it's feathered in the right way. Holding Control and Shift to do this, and I'm going to add another mask to it. I'm just going to go double click again in this mask and double click and scale down even further. And I'm going to set this one to subtract and set the feathering really high. I'm actually going to scale it up a bit more, and this is just going to be sort of like a shock wave. About 300. There we go. And we can just animate this solid scale. So if we go to back when the fire starts, we want the scale to be set at 0. And just over the period of a few frames, we want the scale to be up to hugeness like that. And that's all we're going to need for this comp. Just going to do Alt end bracket and Alt begin bracket, just so we don't have it playing throughout the whole comp. Switch it back on. Then we're going to add a displace. So I'm just going to go displace, and I'm just going to add displacement map. Switch off our displacement map and use displace comp 1. And now we're just going to get a bit of displacement as we go through. I mean, we can do increase the max. I'm going to set it to luminance actually. That's why we're not seeing very much. Luminance and luminance. Set this to about 5. Now we should be seeing a bit of displacement in the pixels as we're going through. You see, I think that's it. There, you can see the displacement as it comes through. Just a bit of a shock wave to add the effect. You can see it displace the bricks. I might set this to about 15 for X and Y, just so we can really see that make a difference. There we go, we can see the shock wave coming through there. And that's just going to add a bit to the realism of the effect. There we go. So that's just about it for this compositing half of the tutorial. I hope you've enjoyed it.